If you're a woodworker, you need to see this video. In fact, if you know any woodworkers, you should send it to them because we're going to talk about wood, but not just any wood, hardwood. We're going to talk about the hardwood lumber business and what's going on with hardwood lumber prices and how you can get the best wood for the cheapest price for your next project. So stick around. So let's start off by defining a few things. In the world of wood, there's two types. There's hardwood and softwood. And while the name sounds straightforward, it sometimes isn't. There are softwoods that are harder than hardwoods, and there's some hardwoods that are softer than softwoods. So where does the distinction come from? Well, it isn't just about how hard or how durable the wood is, but rather about what type of tree it comes from. Hardwoods come from what are called angiosperms. These are flowering trees like oak, maple, and walnut. They typically have broad leaves, which are shed seasonally. They also tend to have fruit or nuts. These trees are also known as deciduous trees. Softwoods come from gymnosperms. These are non-flowering, cone-bearing trees like pine, spruce, fir, and cedar. These are usually evergreen and retain their needle-like leaves year-round. These trees are also called conifers. Then there is density. Wood hardness is measured using a scale known as the Janka hardness scale. Now, I'll explain some other time exactly how it's calculated, but for our purposes, it's enough to know that they test how hard or dense wood is, and then they give it a score. And here's what that looks like. You can see here that some of the least dense woods out there include balsa wood, western red cedar, and eastern white pine. The wood at the highest end of the scale, or the hardest woods that exist out there, tend to be exotic woods from places like the Amazon rainforest or parts of Africa. But some of the hardest domestic woods include mesquite, hickory, and live oak. But like I say, the names softwood and hardwood are full of contradictions, because if we look at that list again, we could see that one of the softest woods, balsa, is actually considered a hardwood. And yew, which is harder than hard maple, white oak, and ash, is a softwood. Now, every species of wood has its own characteristics and uses, but it's important to understand that 80% of all wood used in the entire world is softwood. Softwood is used for building homes, especially for framing. It's used for plywood and MDF, as well as door frames and moldings, not to mention paper and packaging products. Even telephone poles, those are all softwoods. Softwoods are great for all of that because they grow quickly and they're easy to work. But as a woodworker, softwoods aren't always the best thing to use. Now, I think that a lot of us start out by using softwood because it's easy to get our hands on and it's cheaper, but there's a lot of downsides. For example, most softwood comes from young trees and sometimes from plantations, and so they tend to have really wide growth rings, which leads to more chip out and less attractive grain patterns. The color of softwood is also less desirable, and a lot of softwood contains a lot of sap, even after drying, which can make a mess and sometimes gum up your tools. So at a certain point, all woodworkers realize that in order to make something really nice, something that will last a really long time, something of quality, you're going to need to go with hardwoods. Now, the biggest issue out there, of course, is cost. It can be very expensive to use hardwoods. But in the rest of this video, we're going to talk about hardwood lumber prices and how you can get quality hardwoods at the absolute best price. But before we get into that, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Tokovas. Tokovas makes boots, amazing boots, both Western boots and work boots, and I've got a pair of each and I love them both. My wife also loves her new boots and they look great. Now, the great thing about these boots is that they're comfortable right out of the box, and you can tell that they're very well made. The leather quality is fantastic, and they have tons of different options for any style. In fact, I recently popped into one of their retail stores, and you can see here that they have tons of different options, so many boots to choose from. These boots are handmade and use premium leather, and I'm sure that they're going to last for years. So if you're in the market for a new pair of boots, check out Tokovas. You can click on the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen to get your new favorite pair of boots today. And like I say, they make both fantastic work boots and Western boots. Tokovas has been a great partner for the channel and I love their boots. So again, check out the link in my description or the QR code on the screen. And thanks again to Tokovas for sponsoring this video. So every woodworker comes to a point in their woodworking journey where they realize that while softwood has its uses, it really sucks for most woodworking projects. One of the biggest challenges, however, is the cost of hardwoods. And hardwood prices have gone up quite a bit in recent years. In fact, check out this graph of the producer price index showing the price of hardwood lumber over time. You can see here that prices peaked during the pandemic and have since come down, although not to where they once were. And now they even seem to be rising a bit. Now, I want you to check out this other graph. This is a graph from the Federal Reserve showing the domestic production prices from the perspective of the sawmill industry, and not from the perspective of commodity traders or retailers. And what's interesting about this one is you can see that there was a dip in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, followed by a huge spike. But since then, it's been pretty stagnant. In fact, prices paid to mills for their lumber is pretty low right now, lower even than they were in 2014 or 2018. So what that tells us is that the mills are not getting paid a lot for their lumber, but the retail prices are still fairly high. To understand what's going on here, we also need to understand a bit more about the hardwood lumber business. First off, like all lumber, hardwood lumber prices are affected by the housing market. But hardwood lumber prices are a lot less sticky than softwood lumber prices. And what I mean by that is that hardwoods are generally considered to be a luxury item, and there's quite a few alternatives. If you can't afford hardwood floors, there are a lot of cheaper options. Same thing with cabinets or furniture. The look and quality may not be exactly what you want, but if times are tough, then a luxury commodity like hardwoods tend to get cut out. The same can't be said for softwoods. There really aren't a lot of comparable alternatives out there for softwood lumber. So that's the demand side, but there's also a question about supply. So to talk about that, I want to bring in a buddy of mine. This is Simon Ince, and he works in the hardwood lumber industry in Pennsylvania and was actually my hardwood lumber dealer when I lived there. I sat down with him a few months back to talk about the hardwood lumber industry and what's going on at the mills, and here's what he said.
It's like every year things change drastically, but there's certain things like COVID boosted prices, shot things way up. It was great. It couldn't have been long before that. Trade war with China, 25% tariff on hardwood lumber, prices shot way down. I mean, it was terrible. Right now, prices are certainly lower than they were in 2021, at least on the wholesale side of things. The retail side it's a little more stable, but the wholesale side, prices are pretty low at the moment on most species. And I think in the next year, we're going to see that start to go up because there's a lot of people are deciding, you know what, I'm not going to sell my timberland right now because I'm not going to get as much money for it. In fact, when the market's not good, and a lot of these small sawmills, like I've had enough of losing money for years, so they've been shutting down and closing the doors and that. So we've seen a pretty big reduction in the total production of lumber in the past 12 months. It doesn't look like the production is going to significantly increase in the next year.
So this is really a supply problem. Landowners are not selling their timber stock because they know that they won't get a good price for it, and that leads to lower supply at the mills. Lumber mills are not getting a decent price for the lumber that they mill up and sell, and so they tend to close up shop. All of this leads to a dearth of lumber supplies.
I do think this next year we're going to see an uptick in demand. The demand has been low for a couple of years now. And I think we're going to see that go up. And I think as soon as we see that go up a little bit, we're going to see the prices go up with it. Because like I said earlier, the supply is just not there for it.
Now, if demand stays low, that really isn't a huge deal. But if there were to be a huge uptick in demand or a huge spike in demand, then the supply simply will not be able to keep up. And what we'll see are huge price increases in hardwood lumber. There is another dimension that we need to think about in all this, and that is foreign markets. About 30% of our softwood lumber is exported outside of the US, but about 40% of our domestic hardwood lumber is exported overseas. So it's a lot more. And my friend Simon talked about this too.
US lumber industry, I mean, since the 60s it goes up and then down and then up and then down. It's not like a nice, steady, gradual incline. It just has these huge waves, and it can be affected so much by other parts of the world, whether we put tariffs on certain countries, stuff like that, on which products they get put on. Asia buys so much from us in hardwoods that if we put say 20, like the last time that we had tariffs put on with China on hardwood lumber, it was a 25% tariff. They did not pay that 25%. They paid 12.5%. We paid 12.5%. We dropped all of our prices 12.5% to match that. It affects us greatly.
So just to be clear though, you didn't actually pay the tariff. They paid the tariff, but you had to drop your price in order for them to even buy it at all. Is that
correct? Yeah, and this was on like say the tariffs were put in place on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Any loads arriving from Monday afterwards, we had to drop the price like immediately. Like stuff that had shipped 6 weeks ago, we dropped the price instantly.
Okay.
It
Or else
wasn't
it
like
just wouldn't sell, right? It would just
exactly. Yeah, I mean, otherwise they just cancel the order. Then you're stuck with a container of lumber sitting at a port somewhere, and it's racking up $1,000 a day in storage charges.
So we sell a lot of lumber to Europe and Asia especially. And when we hit them with tariffs, they hit us with tariffs. And that has a huge impact to US businesses that ship overseas and try to sell their products overseas. US companies have to drop their prices and they ultimately end up making less money. And for some mills, that's just impossible to withstand, and so they shut down. Another interesting thing that Simon mentioned is that insurance premiums have gone up substantially, and that's making it also very expensive to operate. Here's what he said specifically about that.
The cost of insurance. We went from, I think we were roughly $70,000 a year in insurance premiums to just shy of $500,000 in a matter of like 2 years.
Wow.
So we've got to make up that difference. The lumber industry does not make a huge profit margin anywhere.
Yeah.
So that to have to absorb almost $400,000 additional a year for the insurance, it was just going to be impossible for us.
So hardwood mills are getting less money for their lumber. They're being hit with tariffs on exports, and their costs like insurance are going way up. That's leading to more and more mills being shut down because they can't stay in business. And again, that leads to a loss of supply capacity in the market. So what we need to look out for is a change in the market. If the economy improves and there's more building, then we may see hardwood lumber prices shoot up, perhaps even higher than we did during the pandemic, because there just won't be enough capacity to supply what the market demands. But if the market stays stagnant and nothing changes, then we're likely to see lumber prices that stay relatively stable, at least in the short term. So what does that mean for us? How can you or I as a woodworker and consumer get our hands on some quality hardwood without breaking the bank? Well, here are some rules to follow, and there really is a right and a wrong way to buy hardwood lumber. First of all, never buy hardwood lumber from a big box store. Here are some pictures that I took from a recent trip to a Home Depot to check out their hardwood lumber pile. And first of all, they only sell two types of hardwood. They sell poplar and red oak. And it's all surfaced on four sides, which usually makes it a bit more expensive. Added to that, they store it upright like this, which could lead to the boards warping a bit. It's really best to store them flat. But the biggest reason why you shouldn't buy from big box stores is the cost. Now, hardwoods are generally sold by the board foot, but at the big box stores, they sell them by the linear foot. So how does that actually compare in prices? Well, I recently went to my local hardwood dealer here in Texas and bought some poplar at $2.38 per board foot. At Home Depot, this poplar costs $3.13 per linear foot at 4 inches wide. So an 8-foot board would cost around $25. At my local hardwood dealer, that same board would cost about $6.50. Now that's for rough cut, but surfacing is not that expensive, and you could probably pay less than $8 out the door. So that is about a 300% markup. So never go to a big box store for hardwood lumber. So where should you go? Well, that answer actually depends a lot upon where you live. When I lived in Pennsylvania, it was not hard to find a mill. There were mills all over. And I went to mills all the time, including Amish mills, and I got some incredible deals. But mills are not always interested in selling low quantities, and so that can sometimes be a challenge for smaller woodworkers. And also some parts of the country don't have any mills. So the next thing to do would be to look at Facebook Marketplace or local classifieds. In certain parts of the country, there are tons of guys who bought sawmills and cut lumber as a small business or just for funsies. And so it's not hard to find guys who are willing to sell decent lumber to you at a good price. Just be careful about lumber that's not properly dried or is infected with wood-destroying insects like powder post beetles or something like that. That's a whole other video for a whole other day. I've got some experience with that. Now, the other great thing about Facebook Marketplace is something you see a lot are people who are retiring or getting out of woodworking and have a lot of lumber to sell as well. And you can find some great deals. In fact, I recently bought some of this royal mahogany. That's an imported exotic wood. It's about 250 board feet, and I paid around $300 to a guy who was closing up his cabinet shop. There are deals out there if you know what you're looking for. But if you live somewhere, especially in the West or in a place like Arizona, there's not going to be a lot of hardwood lumber mills around. Your best bet is to find a good local lumber dealer. There are definitely places like that all over, but remember, the further you are from parts of the country where hardwood lumber grows and is cut, the more you're going to pay for it. In Pennsylvania, I paid around $3 to $4 a board foot for white oak. Here in Texas, it's around $8 to $10 a board foot and sometimes more. But there are other ways to get your hands on good lumber. One thing you can do is you can call up local cabinet shops. They're always building out of hardwood and they always have scraps. And so call them up and ask them if they have scraps that they're willing to give you. Now, you have to be strategic about this because you don't want to be annoying or cause issues for them. But listen, these places, they scrap an obscene amount of lumber. This is good hardwood that they just take and they just toss in a dumpster because they don't need it. They always got more coming in. Now, it's not going to be huge pieces. It's not going to be like wide boards or anything like that. You're not going to be able to build an 8-piece dining set out of this, but it can be perfect for a lot of projects and it can be free. A lot of other people talk about pallet wood as well, which can sometimes be hardwood, but I personally am not a fan of pallet wood. And I've made a few videos on that and I'll link them below just in case you want to check them out and understand some of the reservations I have about using pallet wood for your woodworking projects. All in all, the hardwood lumber business is fascinating. Prices are actually pretty low right now comparatively, and they should stay that way as long as demand stays low. But if demand starts to creep up and the mills, because of closures, are not able to keep up, or if on the other side, more mills close and there isn't enough supply to supply even the demand that we have now, then we're going to have a supply and demand imbalance and prices are going to go up. And if demand goes up really high, they're definitely going to spike. Now, whether that'll happen, no one knows. Your guess is as good as mine. But if things happen gradually, then prices will remain relatively stable. But if things happen quickly, that's when we're going to see a lot of those short-term large spikes. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope that you learned something. And if you have anything to add, if you have any tips on how you can find good hardwood lumber for cheap or for free, please be sure to leave a comment and let me know. Please also be sure to send this video to one of your woodworker friends who may find it interesting. And also be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos about woodworking, lumber, tools, and DIY projects. And I'll see you in the next one.